March 12, 2026. A U.S. Navy destroyer fires its 5-inch cannon at an Iranian speedboat approaching the USS Abraham Lincoln. It misses. Fires again. Misses again. A helicopter has to finish the job. The official story: America's overwhelming military superiority will reopen the Strait of Hormuz within days. Energy Secretary Chris Wright says naval escorts will be ready by end of month. Defense officials assure markets that Iran's conventional navy has been destroyed. 9 warships sunk, hundreds of fast attack boats eliminated. The message is clear. The world's most powerful military will restore order to the waterway carrying 20% of global oil. But here's the number that breaks that narrative. 21 nautical miles. That's how wide the Strait of Hormuz is at its narrowest point, according to the International Energy Agency. The navigable shipping lanes? 2 miles wide in each direction, separated by a 2-mile buffer zone. And in those 21 miles of shallow, cluttered water, Iran has built something the Pentagon can't solve with firepower. Since February 28th, Iran has launched 21 confirmed attacks on merchant vessels. Traffic through the strait dropped 70%. Over 150 ships now anchor outside the danger zone, waiting. The historical average is 138 vessels transiting every 24 hours. Now, nearly zero. If the U.S. Navy can't hit a single speedboat with a guided 5-inch cannon, how is it supposed to protect slow-moving oil tankers from swarms of 100 boats attacking simultaneously at 90 knots, while anti-ship missiles launch from hidden coastal positions? When you follow the money trail, you find something the Pentagon doesn't want to admit. America spent 40 years optimizing for the wrong war. And what you'll see by Part 3 is that Iran spent those same 40 years building a fortress in plain sight, one that turns American technological superiority into a liability. Rear Admiral Ali Reza Tangsiri commands Iran's Revolutionary Guard Navy. He's 58, with 35 years studying one stretch of water. In December 2021, he stood at Bandar Abbas port as Iran took delivery of 110 new combat speedboats. According to Naval News, he announced speed progression from 55 knots to 75, then 90, with the next generation reaching 110 knots, approximately 204 kilometers per hour. That's not random. That's deliberate asymmetry. The USS Abraham Lincoln cost $13 billion. It's 1,092 feet long and requires miles of open water to maneuver. Each escort destroyer carries between 90 and 96 missile launch cells, with roughly 2/3 dedicated to air defense, according to analysis from the Al Jazeera Center for Studies. Each SM-2 interceptor missile costs $1.2 million. Iran's newest Haydar 110 missile boats cost perhaps $500,000 each. The IRGC Navy operates over 1,000 small fast attack boats, according to the Strauss Center for International Security and Law. Iran controls 7 of the 8 major islands in the strait: Qashm, Hormuz, Hengam, Larak, positioned like sentries commanding every shipping lane. Here's the math that matters. If Iran launches 100 speedboats in a coordinated swarm attack, and each U.S. destroyer can fire maybe 60 air defense missiles before running dry, the numbers don't work. And that's before you add the anti-ship missiles. Iran's Noor missiles have a baseline range of 120 kilometers, extending to 170 kilometers in upgraded variants. The Qatar variant reaches 200 to 300 kilometers, according to Defense Security Asia. Iran can fire these from mobile coastal launchers, reposition, and fire again, all from positions the U.S. must locate and destroy with 5,000-pound bunker-buster munitions. But here's what none of this explains. Why did Iran wait 40 years to activate this capability? Why now? And that missing piece is exactly what Part 3 reveals. In a hardened bunker carved into Iran's coastal mountains, speedboats sit on rails, hidden from satellites. Mobile missile launchers move between tunnel networks. Mines wait in underwater caches. This isn't improvisation. It's a multi-layered defense system built since 1979 to solve one problem. How do you deter an enemy with 100 times your military budget? The answer: make geography your weapon. The strait's depth ranges from 200 to 330 feet throughout most of its width, according to Britannica. Shallow enough for mines, too cluttered for carrier strike groups to maneuver. And Iran spent 4 decades studying every current, every reef, every hiding spot in those 21 miles. February 28, 2026. U.S. and Israeli strikes kill Iran's supreme leader. New leader Mojtaba Khamenei issues a statement, according to The Hill. The Strait of Hormuz will remain closed. Not as rhetoric, as policy. Because Iran's regime survival depends on one capability: the power to impose costs on the global economy. Here's the incentive chain. Iran needs regime legitimacy after losing its supreme leader. Legitimacy requires demonstrating strength. Strength means proving the West can't simply eliminate Iran's leadership without consequences. And the consequence is Hormuz, the waterway carrying 20 million barrels of oil per day in 2024, according to U.S. Energy Information Administration data. That's 20% of global petroleum consumption. China receives 33% of its oil through the strait. Saudi Arabia accounts for 37.2% of crude exports transiting Hormuz. Iraq contributes 22.8%, UAE 12.9%, Iran 10.6%, Kuwait 10.1%, according to Visual Capitalist Analysis. Approximately 20% of global liquefied natural gas trade flows through these waters, primarily from Qatar, which exported 9.3 billion cubic feet per day of LNG via the strait in 2024. In 1915, the British Empire deployed the world's most powerful battleships to force the Dardanelles Strait connecting the Mediterranean to the Black Sea. On March 18th, Turkish mines sank 3 battleships in a single day. Coastal artillery made the waterway impassable despite British naval superiority. The campaign ended in catastrophic failure. The lesson? Narrow waterways favor whoever controls the shoreline. But there's one more layer that changes everything, and it affects your wallet directly. July 2002. The Pentagon runs a $250 million war game called Millennium Challenge. Retired Marine General Paul Van Riper commands the Red Team, simulating Iran. Blue Team has every advantage: aircraft carriers, satellite reconnaissance, the full U.S. military arsenal. Van Riper studies the scenario. He realizes something the Pentagon planners missed. In confined waters, America's advantages disappear. Day 1 of the exercise. Van Riper coordinates small boats and cruise missiles without using radio traffic, avoiding U.S. signals intelligence. He launches simultaneous attacks from multiple directions. The result, according to WION analysis, 16 major U.S. warships sunk, including an aircraft carrier. Combat casualties estimated at 20,000 in the opening minutes. The attack was so devastating, Pentagon officials paused the exercise, respawned the sunken fleet, and changed the rules to ensure Blue Team victory. That was 24 years ago. The warning was ignored. What you're watching in 2026 is what military theorists call anti-access area denial. The doctrine that says you don't defeat a superior enemy, you make their objectives prohibitively expensive. And what Sun Tzu identified 2,500 years ago, the supreme art of war is to subdue the enemy without fighting. Iran doesn't need to sink the USS Abraham Lincoln. It needs to create a 30% probability it could sink the carrier. That probability is enough, because insurance markets price risk, not outcomes. As of February 27, 2026, hiring a very large crude carrier from the Middle East to China exceeded $200,000 per day, according to Logistics Middle East. Lloyd's of London, the institution that insures global shipping, looked at the Hormuz threat profile and effectively priced the strait as uninsurable. When insurance disappears, shipping stops. No naval battle required. The 1980s tanker war offers the counterpoint. From 1984 to 1988, Iran attacked shipping using Boghamar speedboats and swarm tactics. On April 18, 1988, the U.S. launched Operation Praying Mantis, destroying one Iranian frigate with 45 crew killed, one gunboat with 11 crew killed, 3 speedboats, and 2 platforms, according to Wikipedia's IRGC Navy documentation. But here's what changed. The U.S. Navy fleet is half the size it was during the 1980s, according to Fortune magazine. Iran's capabilities are exponentially more sophisticated. No precision missiles then, no advanced drones, no 110-knot missile boats. And critically, the U.S. decommissioned all Middle East minesweepers in September 2025, according to Foreign Policy. What the historical pattern predicts: protracted economic warfare where geography defeats technology. And what you'll see in the next section is how 15 million barrels per day of crude oil, 34% of global crude oil trade, suddenly vanishing translates to your gasoline jumping from $3.50 to $600 per gallon within weeks. That's where the abstract military strategy becomes a concrete number on your credit card statement. Here's what this means for your wallet. In Q1 2025, nearly 15 million barrels per day of crude oil, 34% of global crude oil trade, passed through Hormuz, according to the International Energy Agency. With the strait contested, that supply disappears. Oil prices don't rise linearly. They spike exponentially when markets price shortage risk. Your gasoline cost jumps from $3.50 per gallon to $600 or higher within weeks. Your electricity bill climbs 40% because natural gas-fired power plants face the same supply shock. Qatar's LNG, 93% of which transits Hormuz according to IEA data, can't reach Asian markets. Your food costs surge 15–25% because Middle Eastern nations produce fertilizer from natural gas, and transportation costs explode. If you have retirement savings in index funds, energy sector volatility wipes out $2,000 to $8,000 in a month for the average portfolio. Supply chain disruptions hit manufacturing. Bangladesh, India, and Pakistan imported nearly two-thirds of their total LNG supplies via Hormuz in 2025. When those economies contract, global trade contracts. But here's the counter-argument. Saudi Arabia and UAE have bypass pipelines that can reroute oil around Hormuz. Combined capacity reaches 3.5 to 5.5 million barrels per day maximum, according to IEA assessments. That sounds reassuring until you do the math. 20 million barrels per day normally flow through the strait. Bypass pipelines handle maybe 5 million. That leaves a 15 million barrel per day shortfall, 75% of normal flow with zero alternative route. Iraq, Kuwait, Qatar, and Bahrain have no bypass options at all. The pipelines also haven't been robustly tested for sustained, full-capacity operation. Even with maximum bypass usage, global oil markets face a 15% supply reduction. That's enough to double prices and trigger recession. Chairman of the Joint Chiefs General Dan Kane acknowledged in March 2026 that Hormuz is a tactically complex environment, and Iran still has the capability to harm friendly forces and commercial shipping, according to Fortune. Defense officials told the Wall Street Journal that escorts aren't currently feasible because Iran can still attack ships. The Pentagon knows it's in a trap. Your wallet knows it too. Every time you fill your tank, every time your electricity bill arrives, every time you check your 401k balance and see energy volatility erasing months of gains. The economic damage is already happening, and what you'll see in the next section is the specific 48-hour warning signal that tells you when Lloyd's of London reprices Gulf shipping risk. That's your window to reposition before energy markets spike and retail investors panic sell at the bottom. That's where understanding the timing pattern separates those who lose money from those who don't. So what do you actually do with this? First, understand the timing window. Historical data from every major chokepoint crisis, Suez 1956, Hormuz 1984-88, Bab el-Mandeb 2024, shows the same pattern. Energy markets reprice 11 to 14 days after the initial shock, not during. Retail investors panic sell. Smart money waits for the bottom, then positions in energy infrastructure that benefits from sustained high prices. Pipeline operators, LNG terminals, strategic petroleum reserve contractors. Watch this specific signal. When Lloyd's of London announces updated risk assessment for Gulf shipping, that's your 48-hour warning before major capital reallocation. Insurance markets move before oil markets because they price probability, not headlines. Second, recognize what you just learned. Anti-access area denial doctrine and asymmetric warfare theory. These aren't abstract concepts, they're frameworks that explain why concentrated geography defeats distributed power. When you see narrow waterways contested, Taiwan Strait, Turkish Straits, Malacca Strait, you're watching the same pattern. The defender who controls the shoreline controls the choke point, regardless of naval superiority in open ocean. Third, ask this question about every geopolitical headline. Who benefits from uncertainty? Iran doesn't need to win militarily. It needs oil at $120 per barrel to fund regime survival. Every day the strait remains contested, that objective succeeds. The US needs oil at $80 to avoid recession. The incentive chain tells you who has escalation dominance. The official story was that overwhelming American firepower would reopen Hormuz within days. What you followed instead was 40 years of deliberate preparation, turning 21 miles of water into a fortress that makes $13 billion aircraft carriers irrelevant. The question isn't whether geography defeats technology in confined spaces. You just watched it happen. The question is whether you position yourself before or after everyone else figures out the pattern is permanent.